If you see a pile of mysterious goo, you're better off running the other way. You never know if it's secretly one of the Clintar, which is a species of extraterrestrial symbiotes that run amok in Marvel's world. These guys can be serious trouble for all who cross their path, so always be on the lookout. Today's video is breaking down all of the main Marvel symbiotes that have plagued heroes and villains alike throughout the years. We'll be talking about who they are, where you've seen them, and just how they can ruin your life forever. So let's get into it right now. First up, we can't really start breaking down the symbiotes until we know where they truly came from. And if you thought all these symbiotes didn't have a crazy origin story, think again. Their beginnings trace all the way back to before the universe started. And if you trace that twisted web of pain and suffering, you'll find Null standing above them all in terrifying glory. Null is an ancient evil deity who existed before the universe itself. This dude loves the dark and was perfectly happy floating forever in pitch blackness. So when that pesky thing called creation started, he wasn't very happy, which set off a chain of events resulting in him forming an artificial planet which came to be known as Clintar, or Planet of the Symbiotes. After using the symbiotes as weapons to attempt to conquer the galaxy and send everything back to darkness, the symbiotes rebelled against their god and imprisoned him. Null is all bad news, but he's also kinda awesome. I mean, he created a sword of living darkness known as the All Black, and used it to decapitate a Celestial. Credit where credit is due, that's pretty rad. When you think of Venom, you probably immediately think of one thing. The iconic Topher Grace performance in Spider-Man 3? No? Okay, just kidding about that. But isn't it pretty crazy that both Topher Grace and Tom Hardy have played the same role?
Right, okay, Bob.
Venom is far and away the most famous symbiote, but a lot of people actually don't know his comic history. Introduced first in the comics, Venom has a fascinating backstory. After taking a major part in the Kree-Skrull War, the symbiote found its way to Earth, where it bonded with its first human. And it's not who you think. Did you know that Deadpool was the first human Venom bonded with? But almost immediately, Deadpool disengaged, worried that his insanity would alter it. Minutes later, Spider-Man found it, and the rest is history. Powers-wise, Venom can do a lot of what Spider-Man can do, only better. He can stick to surfaces and has almost endless supply of organic webbing. Although he started as one of Spider-Man's biggest foes, the Venom symbiote has morphed into recent years to be more of an anti-hero. Now, minus the scary teeth and weird tongue, he's quite lovable, and certainly doesn't need as many brains anymore. When the Venom symbiote attached to Eddie Brock, everyone thought it was the worst possible thing. But then we were introduced to Cletus Cassidy, and everything got so much worse. Eddie was a villain, sure, but Cletus was evil incarnate. A monster with crimes too graphic to explain here in case my grandma's watching. Hi, Grandma. In the comics, while Eddie is in jail, the Venom symbiote comes off and rescues his BFF. Eddie is cellmates with Cletus, and after the escape, a little bit of the symbiote is left behind, merging with Cletus and becoming the supervillain Carnage. Now that's a simple explanation, but the comics go way more in depth with how Carnage was created. You see, in the comics, Venom believed itself to be the 998th generation of its lineage. And right about the time when Venom saved Eddie, the symbiote was due to birth another generation, and thus Carnage was born. So if you think about it, Venom is sort of Carnage's father. That's a weird thought. Let's push that away, shall we? The interesting thing about Carnage is that it's actually bonded to Cletus's blood, making it extremely difficult to separate the two. This next symbiote is a real Scream. Like literally, her name is Scream. This symbiote was created when scientists at the Life Foundation had the brilliant idea to try to create a superpowered security force. Always a good idea, right? Anyway, these scientists managed to kidnap Venom and remove some of his seeds. Then they used these seeds and stuck them inside a few of their trusted employees, one of which was Donna Diego, a security guard with a history of psychotic episodes. Now you can imagine that mixing a symbiote with someone like Donna didn't go too well, and thus Scream was born, causing all sorts of trouble and damage. Powers-wise, she's very similar to Venom. It just took her longer to learn to control her abilities. Overall, she has the standard super strength, super stamina, wall crawling, as well as a few nifty camouflage capabilities. The really interesting thing about Scream is that the symbiote prefers to use hair-like tendrils to attack foes, because come on, that just looks way cooler than what everyone else can do, right? Remember how I said Venom was the 998th of his lineage and Carnage was the 999th? Well, that means you know the next one up is Lucky 1000. And you just know that spells bad news. The 1000th of anything is never a good thing. And this symbiote is particularly nasty individual. It's Toxin. Toxin was so strong and dangerous that both Venom and Carnage feared him. Can you believe that? If those two heavyweights are afraid of anything, then the whole world should be afraid, and Toxin definitely lived up to his reputation. After Toxin bonded with a police officer, Pat Mulligan, who tried to teach the new symbiote how to deal proper justice. But eventually Toxin was forced to bond with another individual, Eddie Brock, and things got much messier. When the symbiote was with Pat, it had all the normal symbiote powers, only far superior in every way to Venom and Carnage. But once it merged with Eddie, things were taken to the next level, and Toxin really lived up to his name. Probably the coolest new feature Toxin got after bonding with Eddie was the poisonous fangs, which packed one heck of a bite. There are some truly unique symbiotes in the Marvel Universe, but one of the most interesting is Hybrid. The crazy thing about Hybrid is that it's not just one symbiote, it's 4. I mentioned earlier how Scream was made when the Life Foundation injected 5 symbiotes into 5 employees. Scream disposed of the other 4 hosts, leaving the 4 symbiotes known as Riot, Phage, Lasher, and Agony all alone. In a bizarre twist, the 4 of them combined into a single symbiote entity known as Hybrid, and fused themselves with a security guard who had once helped them escape from containment. Their host name is Scott Washington, a guard who had lost the ability to walk. Once Hybrid fused with him, he regained that ability again. The only downside was that now he had 4 different voices/personalities in his head talking to him. That would be enough to drive even Deadpool a little more nuts. But in a refreshing change of pace, Hybrid is usually the one who talks Scott out of doing something violent or rash, making for a very interesting relationship. Mavis Trent has got one of the coolest sounding secret agent names. Doesn't it just roll off the tongue like James Bond and Jason Bourne? Hi, I'm Mavis Trent, agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Yeah, we definitely dig it. But although Mavis may be a secret agent by day, she also has a double life with her symbiote, which uses the codename Payback. And we just got to say she looks a lot better than most of these other symbiotes. Sure, she's deadly, but we'd much rather to face her than the terrifying grotesque Venom or Carnage. She looks different from the other symbiotes, as she's able to transform into a silver-skinned energy form. Powers-wise, she works a little differently than the others. She has increased agility, speed, and durability, as well as rapid healing factor. Unlike the other symbiotes, she can also fly as well as generate electricity. What also sets Payback apart is that she only activates when its host is in a state of total bliss. So if Mavis is stressed out and panicked, she's out of luck when it comes to relying on her symbiote. I've talked about Hybrid, which is 4 symbiotes fused as one, but now it's time to delve into each one of its unique parts, because all of them are interesting in their own special way. First up is the symbiote that sounds most likely to be the frontman for a metal band, Lasher. So when the Life Foundation forcibly extracted this symbiote seed from Venom and hatched it, Lasher was still too young to properly control a host of its own. So it fused with Security Force Officer Raymond Hernandez. The two would go on to work alongside the other 4 symbiotes as the Foundation's Guardian symbiotes. But unfortunately, things didn't last long for Lasher. While the Guardians were fighting Venom and Spider-Man, Venom used a metabolic accelerator that sped up the enemy symbiote's aging process, turning them all to dust and seemingly ending both the symbiotes and their hosts. Of course, that wasn't the end of things, as Lasher came back eventually and formed Hybrid. As you can guess, Lasher liked lashing out at enemies. He created tentacles on his back that would cause a lot of damage to all who crossed him. If you look at the mission statement for the Life Foundation, you can understand why they were so adamant about creating a special task force of symbiotes. The Life Foundation overall was determined to prepare for MAD, or mutually assured destruction, and was looking for a way to protect their wealthy clients after the inevitable nuclear holocaust. That's right. So if you were a millionaire who wanted to survive in the world after bombs dropped everywhere, you would hire the Life Foundation's advanced security team to protect you. Yeah, it seems really flawed in practice, but it makes the Foundation only choose the best of the best when it comes to deciding on who would be given symbiote seeds. One of those individuals was Leslie Gesnaria, who is fused with the symbiote known as Agony. If you like the color purple, well, Agony is probably your favorite symbiote, because her character design looks like the wild berry Skittles bag. Each one of these Life Foundation symbiotes have a few unique abilities, and Agony's skill is that she can not only spit acid, but can absorb certain chemicals. Next up on the list of symbiotes who the Life Foundation forced into existence is Phage. Originally, this symbiote bonded with the skilled mercenary Karl Mach, who thought of himself as the leader of the group of symbiotes. Everybody sort of realized that Scream was the actual leader, but they more or less let Karl think he was in charge. Attaboy, Karl. And that's the attitude that probably made Karl not long for this world. Scream eventually dispatched Karl and the symbiote was left without a proper host, which of course led to the 4 symbiotes joining together to become Hybrid. In terms of powers and abilities, Phage actually has a lot in common with his de facto brother, Carnage. Carnage has the nasty tendency to form his tendrils into weapons to really slice up his opponents, and Phage can do something similar. The symbiote could create those long, serrated blades that were a serious nuisance to anyone fighting him. But that's not the only thing that made him special. If Phage wanted to, he could throw parts of himself at his enemies, which would be highly acidic and could melt through skin, metal, and other objects. Last but certainly not least with these Life Foundation symbiotes is Riot. Now, I've gone through and explained everything about the Life Foundation and these 5 special symbiotes, so I'm going to pivot a little bit with this last one. In the comics, Riot follows the same path as his brothers and sisters, but in live action, things are a little different. If you're watching this video, chances are you've seen Venom. You know the big bad of the movie turns out to be Carlton Drake, the leader of the Life Foundation. By the end of the movie, Drake gets a symbiote of his own, and what follows is a full-on slugfest between Venom and Drake's symbiote Riot. His powers are quite terrifying. As in the film, he jumps around from host to host, taking full control of their bodies. Weapons-wise, the movie version of Riot is able to construct blades, spikes, flails, and claws that he can choose to shoot as projectiles if he wanted to. Yeah, it's a really good thing Eddie and Venom got rid of this symbiote because he was total bad news. Like a turd in the wind. If you're a fan of more tech-based characters, then chances are you might find Scorn the most appealing. Let me explain. After saving Cletus Cassidy from Earth's orbit, industrialist Michael Hall used Carnage to create a new type of technology, a prosthetic arm that utilized a biomechanical computer chip that used the symbiote's constituent matter as circulatory, that allowed it to react to the user's thoughts. This prosthetic arm was given to psychiatrist Dr. Tanis Neves, who lost her right arm in a shootout. But the symbiote matter inside the prosthetic arm caused her to have nightmarish hallucinations, which sounds like a horrible price to pay. Eventually, Carnage came around and bonded with Neves for a short time, but when it left, it deposited its new spawn into Neves' arm. This spawn would be known as Scorn. Being tech-based, Scorn has an interesting array of powers, including being able to fuse itself with different types of weapons, data manipulation, can communicate with all forms of technology, and even change herself into any sort of machinery that she holds or touches. Besides the rocky beginning, Scorn actually sounds like a really cool symbiote. It's easy to think that we live in a bubble here on Earth, but the universe is a big place. In the Marvel Universe, just because there's a lot of symbiotes here on the planet doesn't mean they don't travel elsewhere. The best example of this is the symbiote with the most interesting name on the list, ZZZXX. This symbiote became to be known as a unique symbiote mutation, mainly because it prefers to feed on its host's brains rather than adrenaline. That makes the symbiote we want to encounter the least out of any of them. We can handle space goo forming around and controlling our bodies, but feeding on our brains, well, that's where we draw the line. ZZZXX was discovered by the Shi'ar race, who pulled an already boneheaded move in its quest to understand the symbiote. It was generally decided that this new strange symbiote was one of the most dangerous criminals of the Shi'ar Empire had ever captured before, and that gave them the bright idea to put ZZZXX into an Imperial Guard. We know the saying is keep your friends close and your enemies closer, but that's a little ridiculous. The big lesson with the Mania symbiote is that you can't force a true connection no matter how hard you try. We don't know what it is about corporations, but for some reason they keep looking at these symbiotes and want to create new stuff out of them. It never works, guys, just drop it. That's what happened when the Ararat Corporation took a piece of Venom's tongue and cloned it and experimented on it until they made a new symbiote called Mania. At least this group was straightforward with its goals. It simply wanted to wipe out all life on Earth. But they had a serious problem with this new symbiote. It wouldn't bond with anyone. All the people that the Ararat Corporation put in front of it, Mania would just sadistically eliminate because it enjoyed it. Finally, the suits in charge tried something drastic. They gave Mania 2 options at once, an elderly mental patient and a prison inmate. The prison inmate was able to fight it off, but Mania ended up fusing with the elderly mental patient before doing horrible things to the prisoner. Yeah, Mania doesn't sound like a lot of fun to be around. Moving on. Eddie Brock will forever be linked to Venom, but in the comics, another surprising character actually bonded with the symbiote for a long time, and that was none other than Flash Thompson. Yes, the same Flash Thompson that gave Peter Parker wedgies after class in high school. When Flash bonded with Venom, he became a soldier for the government and operated as Agent Venom. Eventually, he and Eddie Brock had a major showdown, with the Venom symbiote not entirely sure who it wanted to stay bonded with, and ended up latching onto both men at the same time. Talk about an awkward love triangle. Spider-Man arrived on scene and splashed the symbiote with anti-venom serum in an attempt to stop it. Instead of wiping it out, it caused Flash to become anti-venom, which was just a color-inverted version of his Agent Venom form. After this transformation, Flash could no longer bond with the original Venom symbiote. First a love triangle and then a sad breakup. It's like a romantic comedy with superheroes. Now, if only we could somehow get the MCU's version of Flash infected with a Venom symbiote.
A good suit can make you feel on top of the world. It can grant you some super strength, but it could also make you a lot angrier. Angry enough to do anything in your power to turn our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, Peter Parker, into minced meat. Well, if that suit is a Clintarian symbiote, that is. On the battle world, the Beyonders sent Earth's heroes and villains to fight it out like insects in a 10-year-old's mayonnaise jar. But it turns out that the white jumpsuit with shoulder pads was only the second most problematic piece of clothing. Since that fateful meeting, the Venom Symbiote has gotten around. So let's take a look at some of its more reluctant temporary besties. Sometimes bad guys like to outsource. Mac Gargan is no stranger to being recruited. As a private investigator, he was recruited by J. Jonah Jameson to figure out how Peter Parker kept getting all those sweet Spider-Man pics. When that didn't work out, he recruited Gargan for an experiment that turned him into the spider's natural enemy. No, not a rolled-up newspaper, a scorpion. And according to National Geographic, scorpions hunt spiders. It all checks out. While being Norman Osborn's get-out-of-jail plan, another big-time Spider-Man hater approached him, but this time it was the Venom Symbiote. The symbiote was looking for a new ride, and Gargan had what he needed. Like all troubled relationships, it worked out at the beginning. Scorpion moved up to the villain big leagues and even found a spot on the Thunderbolts. Some relationships just can't survive an encounter with an ex, and when the Scorpion runs across Eddie Brock, it all starts to fall apart as Venom tries to bond with its old bestie. Only to encounter the anti-Venom secretly put in Brock by another Spider-Man hater, Negative Man. Man, the Spider-Man Haters Club gets around. Things get worse from there, and the symbiote tells Gargan that their relationship ends when he wants it to. If only Gargan had talked to Brock and Parker first. S.H.I.E.L.D. can be full of bad ideas. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they tried to use the Tesseract to create weapons and allowed Hydra to use them to build a threat-killing system. In the comics, they thought it might be a good idea to find a way to use the symbiote for their own purposes. For a host, they picked someone close to Spider-Man because, of course. This time, it was Peter Parker's former bully-turned-friend-turned-war vet, Flash Thompson. When Flash loses his legs in the war, he's offered the symbiote to become Agent Venom. On the plus side, the symbiote gives him legs again. On the negative side, Thompson isn't able to be with the symbiote for longer than 48 hours. Otherwise, the symbiote takes over, including his less-than-heroic tendencies, like trying to make Jack-o'-lantern eat a grenade. The job of Agent Venom eventually takes the pair into space where he meets the Guardians of the Galaxy and the other Clintarians, eventually becoming Agent of the Cosmos. And to think, most people thought he'd peak at high school football. Eventually, Thompson struggles with the symbiote's more violent nature, and another Venom X comes a-callin', so all questionable things must come to an end. Last year, moviegoers were introduced to the various incarnations of Spider-Man in the movie Into the Spider-Verse, featuring Miles Morales as Spider-Man and 3 other Peter Parkers, a Penny Parker and a Peter Porker. The thing is, that's only scratching the surface of all the different versions of Spider-Man there are. There's even a Japanese movie version that operates a giant robot. It's a whole thing. For the animated Ultimate Spider-Man, Venom got a new origin story. This time around, Dr. Octavius and Norman Osborn take some Spider-Man DNA to create the Venom Symbiote, since there wasn't a Secret Wars in the Ultimate Spider-Man animated series. When the symbiote goes looking for Spider-Man to get back to its roots, it eventually ends up bonding with Harry Osborn. It may be a different symbiote, but it's the same old story. Harry thinks he can control it, but eventually the symbiote starts to control him. Unfortunately, Harry's father isn't the kind to win Father of the Year, so even when Harry tries to get things under control, Norman goads him into becoming Venom again. It takes a blast of lightning and anti-venom to free Harry once and for all. The DNA-derived symbiote didn't just contain itself to one animated series. The Disney XD block of Ultimate Marvel programs included shows dedicated to other iconic Marvel characters. One of those shows was for the various Hulks. Oh, yeah, Spider-Man isn't the only one to have a bunch of different versions. This one features the Savage Hulk that we all know and love, his cousin Jennifer Walters, the She-Hulk, Red Hulk, Scar, and former Bruce Banner sidekick Rick Jones. Yep, Hulk used to have a sidekick. Together, they form the Supreme Military Agency of Superheroes, or SMASH, because it wouldn't be superheroes without acronyms. In the episode The Venom Inside, Doc Ock takes an opportunity to send his venom goo after the agents of SMASH, hoping to gather their gamma radiation to form Gamma Venom. With the 5 Hulks gamma radiation and Hulk inside, the irradiated gamma venom starts to bubble. It turns out that it was Doc Ock's plan to cause the gamma venom to explode and create an island of venoms. Unfortunately for agents of SMASH, this isn't a smashing problem. They end up resolving it old school by grabbing a large church bell and collectively punching it, reminiscent of how Spider-Man originally rid himself of the symbiote. In the new Venom comic, Eddie Brock is getting to learn more about the symbiote he can't seem to quit, including the fact that he and Parker aren't the first Earthlings to bond with symbiotes. It turns out that the idea to weaponize Venom for Agent Venom wasn't the first time they explored the super bad idea to try and use the symbiotes. Brock encounters a man with a super comic book name, Rex Strickland. Strickland, it turns out, was part of a secret movement to recreate the super soldier serum. 4 symbiotes are sent to Vietnam, where predictably it all goes wrong. To stop them, Nick Fury sends in the scariest thing he knows: Wolverine. What Nick doesn't know is that Clintarians feed off of anger and adrenaline, so sending in Wolverine is like giving Popeye some spinach. Not only that, but Wolverine gets to see the unsavory methods the government used to make the symbiotes into weapons. And considering how well acquainted he is with government experiments, you could probably imagine how he felt about that. The symbiote also gets some of Wolverine's sense of purpose and speaks the first symbiote words, not animals, saving Wolverine and the others from an explosion. In 2021, Disney Plus subscribers will be introduced to the animated What If series from Marvel Studios. For the fans of the comics, the What If titles have been delivering alternate versions of popular Marvel characters, introduced by Uatu the Watcher for decades. If you're not familiar, the Watchers are the big-headed guy Stan Lee was talking to in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. In one of those stories, Uatu looked in on the Beyonder in Earth 90211. The Beyonder has always had a bit of an 80s look with his wet perm and shoulder pads. Earth 90211 is all about the 80s. Seriously, what's up with those shoulder pads? In this reality, Deadpool is hired to kill the Beyonder because he has bonded MODOK to Galactus's hiney. Buckle in because it only gets weirder from there. The Beyonder separates the symbiote from a distraught Spider-Man and bonds it to Wade Wilson, and the pair party across the universe with a head of symbiote Jerry curls, because why not? Eventually, Venompool gets some counseling from Doc Samson to become his truest self. Unfortunately, his truest self is being a giant jerk. This ends with him taking his Beyonder-destroying device and erasing himself. If all these continuities are hard for you to keep track of, you're not alone. Over time, comic book lines became clogged with alternate realities and timelines, or main timelines get long in the tooth and hard to maintain. Or they wander so far from the origins of the character that the spirit of the original seems like a distant memory. It's hard to keep a character like Peter Parker a teenager or young man when he was created almost 60 years ago. To solve this problem, comic book companies tend to have a massive event where all these different timelines collide, resulting in old ones dying off and sometimes new ones being born. For Marvel, that cleaning house event was 2015's Secret Wars. Distinct from the Beyonder Secret Wars, where he just brought a whole bunch of heroes and villains to a planet to fight like refugee antagonists from a Star Trek episode, this one collided several realities. One of those was Earth 32323, where the civil war between Steve Rogers, finally promoted to general, and Tony Stark has gone on for way too long. To help move things along, Spider-Man gets help from Clint Barton, who managed to inherit the Venom Symbiote from Mac Gargan. Speaking of alternate timelines and what-ifs, sometimes a what-if story can become popular enough that it becomes its own story taking place in its own timeline, which is one of the ways things get so confusing. In the case of Gwen Stacy's Spider-Woman, or as she's more popularly known, Spider-Gwen, it's another member of the expansive Spider-Verse of alternate timeline Spider-Folk. Introduced to the Spider-Verse comics, she proved popular enough to get her own title. In Spider-Gwen's timeline, it's Stacy who gets bitten by a radioactive spider and becomes able to do whatever a spider can, while Peter eventually follows the Kurt Connors path, injecting himself with a formula turning him into a lizard so he can be special like Spider-Woman, who kills him while trying to stop his rampage. No matter who gets the spider bite, tragedy follows. Maybe that's a spider power too. It's a topsy-turvy world she lives in where the symbiote is a creation of Dr. Elsa Brock from the space spiders used to make the spider that gave her powers, and she's tricked into merging with it by a corrupt Matt Murdock in order to get her to kill Rhino in front of the police. You never want to be the third or fourth wheel in a bad relationship. With Eddie Brock and the Venom symbiote's obsession with Peter Parker, it's easy to forget a fourth party in this love-hate affair, and that's Eddie Brock's wife, Anne Weying. Anne becomes aware that she's lost her husband to the world's worst bromance love-hate triangle, and being a lawyer, is more than a little aware of the nastiness her husband has gotten up to with his new hobby of hating Spider-Man. As a result, she helps Spider-Man learn about his new best enemy in the hopes that Spider-Man can stop Venom's destructive ways. She even trails Spider-Man to an amusement park to convince Eddie to give up his beef with the wall crawler. Unfortunately, this is a comic book, and nothing good happens at an amusement park in a comic book. She's shot by Sin Eater as part of his whole crusade, forcing Eddie to lend her the symbiote to save her life. We all know what happens next. Say it with us, it all goes bad. She lashes out at both Sin Eater and Brock until Brock is able to get the symbiote back. The story actually gets a little too dark for this video after that. While in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Carol Danvers went straight from Air Force test pilot to Kree soldier to Captain Marvel, her path in the comic books was a little longer to the red and blue. When she first got into the superheroing business, there was already a Captain Marvel, or Marvel. The rest of the story is more or less familiar. She gets too close to Marvel when a Kree device explodes, gets superpowers, and becomes Miss Marvel. Danvers takes part in the Siege storyline where Norman Osborn took over S.H.I.E.L.D., calling it Hammer, and is taking his evil Avengers on an assault against Asgard, which is 100 feet over Oklahoma. Yeah, things had gotten weird. The result is an all-hands-on-deck brawl that finds Miss Marvel teaming up with Spider-Man to fight a Venom-fused Scorpion. The pair manage to separate the symbiote for Gargan, but the symbiote knows a good thing when it sees it, and bonds with Miss Marvel, hoping to fly away. Thanks to Miss Marvel's half-Kree nature, she's able to break away given the Cluntarian's specific history with the Kree as a former experiment to give the Kree Skrull-like shape-shifting abilities. Remember how we talked about Agent Venom joining the Guardians of the Galaxy and making his way to Clintar and reconnecting with the symbiote group consciousness? It sounds perfectly wonderful, like someone taking a nostalgic gap year trip to the homeland of their ancestors with some chill backpackers they met along the way. Except those backpackers are the Guardians of the Galaxy, and it's not a college student, but a war hero S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who bonded with an unstable alien symbiote with a murder streak a mile wide. At some point, Flash becomes separated from the symbiote. Now that he's back to being a regular guy, the Guardians decide to shuttle Flash back to Earth. In the process, however, the symbiote gets a hold of Groot, causing Rocket to leap into action and get taken over by the symbiote. This leads to Drax the Destroyer showing the symbiote how he got his nickname by slamming Rocket Venom into the wall and gets taken over by the symbiote. The Guardians are slow learners. It's Venom Drax who takes them to Clintar where the symbiote creator Null is held prisoner. The symbiotes then reset Venom and rebond him with Flash. The Civil War part of Battleworld isn't the only time that Hawkeye had a run-in with the symbiote. During the Old Man Logan storyline, Hawkeye had some old man adventures of his own. In the not-so-distant future of Old Man Logan, things have gotten pretty bad. Mysterio had managed to convince Wolverine that his teammates were in fact a massive group of supervillains as part of a coordinated effort on their part to take over the world. As a result, Logan slaughters his teammates. Because of that, he punishes himself in the worst way possible. He moves to Sacramento, California, to live out his days until a blind Hawkeye hires him to take a package east. During that trip, they encounter a number of weird foes and obstacles, including a Venusaurus Rex, a T-Rex from the Savage Lands that had been infested by the Venom Symbiote. It turns out that Hawkeye had lured the symbiote into the Savage Lands to be eaten after multiple men had bonded with it, making a small army of Venoms. Hawkeye had beaten the copies and hoped that getting a T-Rex to eat Venom would be the end of it. Apparently, he doesn't know Venom too well. Spider-Man has a complicated relationship with most of his villains when you get right down to it. Either they're his friends, dad, or a mentor gone wrong, or an alien being that bonded with him who's now obsessed with him. In the case of Otto Octavius, he's had a long relationship that's taken some weird turns. Like when he almost had to call him Uncle Otto. In an effort to top that weirdness, Doc Ock was able to take advantage of Peter tapping into his Octobot's hive mind to swap minds with Peter Parker, leaving Peter in Otto's dying body and Otto in Peter's do-whatever-a-spider-can body. When Peter fails to reverse the process, he instead lays all of his guilt and responsibility on Octavius instead, compelling him to become a good guy. But he's still Otto, so he thinks he'll do it better, becoming the superior Spider-Man. Egos. He encounters Agent Venom, but thinks it's regular Venom and manages to separate Flash from the symbiote and tries to keep it contained, which of course doesn't work. He then becomes Superior Venom, and becomes even more brutal while trying to be a good guy until Octavius realizes that Venom is controlling things. By now, both movie and comic book fans are familiar with the lying liar who tells lies that is Quentin Beck. In the comics, Beck is a frustrated special effects artist who decides to stage a supervillain attack to pretend to be a hero, which of course goes all wrong and puts him in Spider-Man's extensive rogues gallery. As part of that prestigious rogues gallery, Beck went about looking for a way to get his revenge on Peter Parker for thwarting his various plans to get revenge on Peter Parker. It's a vicious circle. During the stories meant to cover the period of time between when Spider-Man got the symbiote suit and discovered that the symbiote suit meant no good, Mysterio managed to get a hold of a little bit of the suit and took it to Kingpin's tech guy, Jonathan Ohm, to see if it could give him an edge against the Wallcrawler. Has this worked for anyone? No, it hasn't. Once more, it all blows up in his face. While Beck is able to use the symbiote to escape the Kingpin and throw some shade on his nickname as the lead pin in bowling, when he decides to kill Spider-Man once and for all, it doesn't end as planned. Of course, at the gooey center of all this symbiote leapfrog is our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. It all started innocently enough as a way to explain how a kid who can barely pay rent selling selfies to a local paper is also able to repair his costume after every fight. Taking a suggestion from a fan, they came up with a symbiote Peter found in a lab during the original Secret Wars. Eventually, Peter found himself acting more aggressively and even going out while he was asleep like it was superhero Ambien. The symbiote turned out to be part of a race of beings created by an ancient being who had a beef with the Celestials. So he cut the head off of one of them and brewed up a species of symbiotes in it before the head became nowhere. The Venom Symbiote had been experimented on by the Kree to get in on these Skrulls' shapeshifting, giving it too much empathy for the now sociopathic species, resulting in it finding itself on the battleworld. While the Venom Symbiote has formed a soft spot for his second host, Eddie Brock, you never forget your first love, and Venom remains obsessed with Peter Parker, alternating between trying to kill him and clumsily trying to be like him.
Venom and Carnage go together like peanut butter and nuclear waste, which means you probably shouldn't ingest both at the same time. We're going to see these two villains go toe-to-toe in Venom 2. These two are just born to be enemies, and today's video gets to the heart of their historic comic rivalry. Let's dive in. You know the big reason why Venom and Carnage make such great rivals? It's because they're actually very similar to each other. Both are cut from the same cloth, and by cloth I obviously mean intergalactic space goo. But you know in movies when the bad guy says to the good guy, "We're not so different, you and I." Well, you could really say that about Venom and Carnage. Sure, their personalities make them worlds apart, and their color schemes are distinct enough where you'll never get the two of them mixed up as long as you know the differences between red and black. But the two will forever be intertwined with each other thanks to their comic history. You probably know that symbiotes are their own separate entities from their hosts, but it's not a big surprise that both the Venom and Carnage symbiotes attach themselves to criminals. The Venom symbiote is best known for getting its start as an alternate suit for Spider-Man, giving him upgraded powers and a sleek all-black suit. It also made Tobey Maguire dance awkwardly, so it wasn't all great stuff. After Peter Parker and the symbiote went through a nasty breakup, it's made its way to fellow Peter Parker hater Eddie Brock, and the two formed an all-new bond. Thanks to its merge with Parker, Venom and Eddie Brock developed a similar set of powers, including web-slinging abilities, and has similar displays of strength, agility, and dexterity as Spider-Man. In the technical sense, Carnage is Venom's offspring, but don't expect to see these two bonding over a father and son fishing trip anytime soon, no. While Eddie was locked up, he was bunkmates with the deranged psychopath Cletus Cassidy. When the Venom symbiote came to rescue Eddie, it left a piece of itself behind, and that little piece merged with Cletus, turning him into Carnage. Carnage has all the same powers as Venom, except with all-around improved stats. He's stronger, faster, more agile, and can produce not just tendrils or webs, but actual deadly weapons that he can hurtle straight at you, making it likely it will just be the last thing you ever see. But he's also different than Venom, as the Carnage symbiote is actually fused with Cletus's blood, which makes Carnage and Cletus way more bonded than Venom and Eddie Brock ever were. It creates an interesting dynamic, as when Eddie and Venom are combined, they usually go by we, but when Carnage and Cletus are merged, they go by I. It really highlights how these two foes are similar, but are vastly different. Of course, it's not just their powers that make them stand apart from each other, it's also their personalities. There are a few key ideological differences between the two, with Carnage being the absolute evil incarnate. This usually forces Venom and Spider-Man to team up to take down this raging red menace. But let's break down some of their most famous comic storylines together to really highlight their differences. If you're looking at the most important stories to really explain the Venom and Carnage rivalry, you need to start at the beginning. After Cletus Cassidy got his introduction in The Amazing Spider-Man number 344, just a few issues later, Carnage would make his grand debut as one of the scariest villains in all of comic history. It kicked off a brand new storyline known as Carnage. Now, with a name like that, you can kinda guess who it's about. This was really the story arc that made you question Venom's role as a bad guy. Because sure, he was a villain, but looking at Carnage, he could have turned out to be so much worse. Eddie Brock is a scary dude who's kind of a jerk, sure, but Cletus Cassidy is the type of human monster who pushed his grandmother down the stairs and did horrible things to his pet dog with an electric drill. Yeah, it's seriously disturbing stuff. It's no wonder why he's a threat that needs to be stopped. In fact, this first Carnage storyline sees Venom and Spider-Man reluctantly team up to take down the bigger threat, which is something you probably never expected at that point in time. But it was this story that drew a line in the sand when it came to the difference between Venom and Carnage. Like sure, you probably wouldn't want to invite Venom to your kid's birthday party, but it made it clear that there were some boundaries when it came to Venom. It's kinda like eating broccoli as a kid. Sure, you absolutely hate it when you're young, but as you grow older, you don't despise it like you used to. But it's still not something you go out of your way to eat, right? That basically describes how you feel about Eddie Brock and the Venom symbiote. Yeah, this storyline was the foundation for Venom to eventually earn the moniker of Lethal Protector, meaning he's willing to end lives, but really only bad people's lives. So as long as you pay your taxes, don't jaywalk, and push your cart back after you're done at the grocery store, you probably don't have to worry too much about Venom coming after you. This idea of differences in ideologies between Venom and Carnage really fuels a lot of other Venom and Carnage storylines, most notably in Maximum Carnage, which if you're a Carnage fan and you've trapped on a deserted island of some sort, bring this one with you because it's the best. Like in the first Carnage storyline, Maximum Carnage sees the villain just become an unstoppable threat. He breaks out of prison and recruits an army of baddies to his side, and the group wreaks havoc everywhere in brutal fashion. I mean brutally. It again forces Spider-Man and Venom to team up to stop Carnage, and it creates a really interesting conflict. Maximum Carnage sees Venom insisting that they use lethal force to stop the evil Carnage once and for all. Obviously, Spider-Man is against that, and in the end, Carnage lives. But it's cemented that Venom thinks taking lives is okay when it comes to the greater good, or if it's someone as despicable and dangerous as Carnage. The Maximum Carnage storyline is a great example of how much Spider-Man is a factor in Venom and Carnage's rivalry. He's the one stopping Venom from ending Carnage's life. And we, the audience, are left wondering if that's really a good or bad thing, given how much damage Carnage creates every time he escapes. What happens when Spider-Man isn't around to be the third point in the awkward love triangle of Venom, Carnage, and Spider-Man? It's difficult to really speculate on because Spidey is such a vital part of the equation. The comics have shown time and time again that both Spider-Man and Venom can't stop Carnage by themselves. They need each other if they want to overcome Carnage's immense power. Cue the team up! Venom and Carnage's rivalry is explored in different ways as well. Just look at the series Venom vs. Carnage, which doesn't so much as see the two physically fighting each other, but rather sees the two symbiotes reluctantly team up to stop another symbiote, this one emerging as the offspring of Carnage and going by Toxin. Turns out both Venom and Carnage don't want Carnage's kid running around causing trouble, so their interests align enough to make a team up. And it's things like this that make their rivalry so interesting. Sure, it's great to see heroes and villains that are utter contrasts of each other, but it's way more intriguing and interesting to see rivals who function in similar ways when facing a problem. It makes the instances where they fight a million times more interesting. But because of comic book history and the way their abilities work, it's easy to see Venom and Eddie Brock as one entity and Carnage and Cletus Cassidy as another, but that's not always the case. Don't forget these symbiotes have a mind of their own, which has created some fun storylines and interesting pairings. One of the best examples of this is the Red Goblin storyline. In this event, good guy Flash Thompson was the lucky partner to the Venom symbiote and had just transformed from Agent Venom to Agent Anti-Venom. Yeah, I know, not the most original name change. And on the other side of things, none other than Norman Osborn got a hold of the Carnage symbiote, turning him into a monstrous new villain known as Red Goblin. So even though it wasn't Eddie Brock and Cletus Cassidy fighting each other, it was still a Venom and Carnage fight, which again was different, but in a lot of ways still familiar. No matter what human skin these symbiotes are attached to, they will always be at odds with one another. They seem destined to do this dance forever. If this was real life, we'd be terrified at that idea, but since we're just reading about it in a comic book, it makes us all real happy. Which brings us to today, where we're all eagerly awaiting Venom 2, and that's not just because we get to see a sweaty, manic, crazed Tom Hardy again, but because Carnage is being introduced and we will get to see a live-action version of this amazing rivalry on the big screen. Can Tom Hardy and Woody Harrelson create as engaging of a rivalry between Venom and Carnage as the comics? Given the caliber of both these actors, we have faith, but there are a lot of different factors involved. Because what would that rivalry actually look like? There's one key difference between those films and the comics: Spider-Man is not a big factor here. In the comics, Spider-Man is an important part of the Venom-Carnage rivalry, but it's really unclear if and how Peter Parker will be introduced to Venom 2. Clearly everyone wants it, and there's a lot of evidence and theories that suggest Tom Holland's Spider-Man will make an appearance in either a cameo role or actually join in on the final fight. But overall, the rivalry that Venom and Carnage will build throughout the movie will mostly be Spidey-free, so what will that look like? The first Venom established Eddie Brock as an anti-hero who only wants Venom to attack bad people, much to the symbiote's disdain. So there really shouldn't be much conflict when it comes to Eddie's desire to destroy Carnage completely once Cletus Cassidy inevitably breaks out and becomes the villain he's destined to be. Whereas in the comics, there's usually a big debate about ending someone's life. Because this movie will focus on just Venom, we could see how it all takes 2 seconds for Eddie and the symbiote to be on the same page regarding stopping Carnage. So without a moral debate about whether to end Carnage's life, the source of conflict has to come from another area. I think the movie will play up the fact that Carnage is a direct result of Venom, meaning Eddie is somewhat responsible for all the damage Carnage is going to cause, since the piece of symbiote that's going to turn Cletus into even more of a monster is coming right from Eddie. I also wouldn't be surprised if Eddie thinks he has to give into some darker tendencies in order to become stronger and defeat Carnage. The first film had Eddie strike a proper anti-hero vibe, but all that could change when Carnage pushes Eddie's to his limits. And really, that's the most important part of this rivalry, because I'm sure there'll be lots of changes from the comic book, but as long as Carnage truly challenges Eddie's beliefs and forces Eddie to confront some of his personal problems, then I'm okay with it. The best rivalries between hero and villain stem from the villain testing the hero's core values. That's something Carnage can definitely do to Eddie, and something that needs to be included in Venom 2 if this rivalry wants to live up to the comics.
By now, you've probably heard about the exciting mid-credit scene following the movie Venom. We got to see a glimpse of Woody Harrelson portraying serial killer Cletus Cassidy, and Marvel fans know what that means. In many ways, Carnage is the stronger symbiote, but we'll talk about some things he just can't do. Before we go head-to-head with Carnage versus Venom, make sure to click that subscribe button for more videos from CBR. Then ring that gray bell to join our notification squad and get the latest updates. Now let's get started. Heroics. This one may sound simple, but the fact is that Venom is a hero, while Carnage is a villain through and through. Sure, Venom is pretty much the definition of an anti-hero, but the word hero is still involved. During the movie Venom, we saw the titular symbiote come to Earth with dreams of conquering it, only to realize it's actually a pretty cool place. He gets perhaps way too close to Eddie Brock and decides he could get used to the whole only eating some of the people some of the time thing. On the other hand, we have Carnage, who has all of Venom's bad qualities and none of his good ones. And to make him an even more insidious character, he's also inextricably linked to a horrific serial killer named Cletus Cassidy. Don't get us wrong, Venom is far from an angel, but he does manage to save the day from time to time. For a long time, Venom and Spider-Man were mortal enemies, but eventually the two decided to live and let live. When it comes to ways to take out a superhero, capitulation is really a criminally underrated method, and it's one that a character like Carnage will never be able to utilize. Sanity. We all know that Venom isn't going to win any awards for most well-adjusted being in the galaxy, but keep in mind that he is an alien from another planet. Sure, he's a fan of ripping people's heads off, but he wants the bodies and heads put neatly in separate piles. Many of Venom's, let's say, unique outlooks on life are easily explained by the fact that he's from an alien planet. Like any other visitor, there's a bit of a learning curve, and a completely different set of morals and customs to learn. Although Venom was hurt by Spider-Man's rejection, he did form an emotional bond with Peter Parker. Before Before he left him, he moved Peter's unconscious body to safety as a final act of kindness. And then on the other hand, we have Carnage, who is not at all capable of that type of empathy. The reason he syncs up so well with Cletus is because they're both absolutely insane. Venom is capable of playing it cool, biding his time and forging useful alliances with other characters. Carnage may be physically stronger, but in terms of mental fortitude, Venom definitely has him beat. Not that it's saying much when they're both bloodthirsty aliens, but at least it's something. Home. In the movie Venom, we learned that the alien symbiotes come from another planet, and they don't appreciate being called parasites. Their real name is the Clintar, although they're more commonly referred to as the symbiotes. These symbiotic extraterrestrials have been around since the universe began, and were created by the deity Null to fight against other creatures. Eventually, Null was defeated by Thor, and the Clintar were left to figure out their own life paths. Many symbiotes sought hosts who could give their lives meaning, and ended up acquiring the traits of their hosts as a result. Sure, some retained their evil nature, but others learned how to be kind, or at the very least not outright vicious. We know Venom remembers his home planet, and is familiar with other members of his species, but this is a backstory Carnage just doesn't have. He doesn't hail from his home world, and has no real connection to that life outside of his relationship to Venom. This life and his sinister merging to Cletus Cassidy is all that he knows, and all he's ever known. It might actually be a little sad if he wasn't such a murderous psychopath. Partnership. If you've seen the movie Venom, or if you've read the comics, you know that Eddie Brock and Venom are just better together. The Marvel movie starts out with the evil Carlton Drake realizing it's harder than he thought to find the perfect host for an alien symbiote. Venom remarks later in the movie that he would be loath to let Eddie Brock go because he's such a perfect host. But at various times in the movie, he can and does let Eddie go. After being forcibly separated from Eddie during the movie, we saw Venom take over a dog and Eddie's ex-girlfriend, Anne Weying. But this is an option Carnage doesn't have. When he fuses with Cletus Cassidy in the comics, he actually enters his bloodstream and becomes one with the killer at a cellular level. Separate. Not only does Venom have the benefit of two minds, he's able to separate from Eddie Brock from time to time. In the comics, we see him merge with many other people, including Spider-Man, Flash Thompson, Lee Price, and Tel Kar. This not only means he can access different powers and abilities, but it's a huge tool when it comes to survival. Cletus Cassidy and Carnage are so intertwined that they're both weakened terribly when separated. Sure, we've seen Carnage merge with other characters from time to time, but he's at his best and strongest when he's fused with Cletus. In the comics, we saw Venom break the bond between Cletus and his symbiote, and absorb the symbiote back into his body. This means Cletus is just one of the many dime a dozen maniacs now, and he isn't happy about it. He proceeds to go even crazier than we thought was possible once stripped of his powers. Cletus paints his body red and goes on a rampage, desperate for his symbiote-infused powers to come back. Big screen. When it comes to Marvel characters, it's no secret that Venom has been a fan favorite for a long time, but there were quite a few complications when it came to him hitting the big screen. Of course, there's the whole Sony, Marvel, Disney thing, where great comic characters ended up owned by different studios who are now converging. And for a long time, it seemed pretty impossible to have a Venom movie without Spider-Man. After all, the reason Venom has his signature powers is because of the time he spent fused with Peter Parker. But as we all know, they were able to move past that little hiccup and bring Venom to the big screen. And to the surprise of many, the movie was actually good. The warped Spider-Man symbol was removed from Venom's chest, and his powers were just attributed to the fact that he's an alien. But another reason which gave fans pause when it came to seeing Venom in theaters was the fact that it was rated PG-13. Comic book fans know that Venom is a brutal character, and that's part of the reason he's so appealing. Creating a PG-13 Venom movie meant toning down the graphic violence and language, which is a huge part of the character. While it was done, we can't see Carnage being able to get his own standalone movie. He's just too violently insane to ever be corralled into a PG-13 film. Fans. Comic book fans know that Spider-Man's costume has changed a ton over the years. In fact, one of our favorite characters was once supposed to be nothing more than a costume change for Peter Parker. Originally, the symbiote first showed up in an issue of The Amazing Spider-Man number 252, back in 1984. But he wouldn't make his debut as Venom until 1998, during The Amazing Spider-Man number 300. That was when the symbiote bonded with Eddie Brock, and grew into much more than just a fashion statement for Spider-Man. The reason Venom stuck around so long is because he has such a rabid fan base. People love Venom, and he regularly appears on lists of best comic book characters. While Carnage is a great villain who certainly has his admirers, he has never risen to the level that Venom has. In fact, Carnage was originally intended to replace Venom, which is why he's essentially Venom 2.0. The original idea was that the symbiote would fuse with other people until eventually settling on Cletus Cassidy, but fans couldn't get enough of Eddie Brock and Venom together. Spider-Man. By now, you know all about the relationship between Venom and Carnage, but now we're going to talk about the relationship between Venom and Spider-Man in the comic books. Eddie Brock and Venom both came to despise Spider-Man on their own, and that hate is what drew them together in the first place. In the comics, Eddie Brock was a journalist who falsely identified someone as the killer, Sin Eater. When Spider-Man unmasked the right person, it destroyed Eddie's career and sent him into a severe downward spiral. Meanwhile, the symbiote had been faithfully serving as Spider-Man's loyal costume before the web-slinger ultimately rejected it. Because Eddie Brock and the symbiote are two of the few beings on the planet who doesn't love Spider-Man, they were a perfect match. But eventually, Spider-Man and Venom make an uneasy peace with one another. They not only let bygones be bygones, but they team up together from time to time to stop bad guys, including Carnage. We know Venom is an anti-hero, but he does have the ability to team up with other heroes when the situation calls for it. This is an option which Carnage will never have, because he is all-out evil. Individuality. There are many reasons to love Venom, but one of the major ones is that he really stands out. Sure, he drew many things from Spider-Man, but they're about as different as two people can be personality-wise. Venom and Eddie Brock may share a body, but they're two very different people and personalities. Cletus may remind you of another infamous villain you're probably very familiar with. He may be from the DC universe, but the Joker is known as one of the best villains of all time. Although he belongs at Batman's Rogue Gallery, his influence can be seen in many comic books, including the Venom series. During the mid-credit scene in the Venom movie, we saw Cletus acting like a stereotypical mentally deranged serial killer, despite his statements to the contrary. Carnage was meant to be another version of Venom, while Cletus was meant to be just like the Joker. While these characters are great, they lack the individuality that Venom and Eddie Brock have. Magic. Venom and Carnage do have a lot of things in common, including their weaknesses. Even if you've just seen the movie Venom, you probably remember that the alien symbiotes have two weaknesses. They can survive massive impacts, death-defying falls, and a hail of bullets, but they are able to be defeated. The first thing the symbiotes can't stand are sound waves of a certain level. It's enough to make a symbiote lose control of its host, or perish altogether if it goes on for too long. The second weakness of the symbiotes is good old-fashioned fire. It may seem simple, but it's an effective way to get rid of any alien symbiotes plaguing you. Unless you're Carnage, that is. That's right, while Venom and Carnage are both susceptible to fire, Carnage is no longer vulnerable to sound waves. This may sound like a huge advantage, but he had to swap that out for another huge weakness. During Carnage Volume 2, number 15, we saw Carnage facing off against the Elder God Chithon. Now, in general, facing off against these kinds of entities tends to end up incredibly bad. But when you're a psychotic villain like Carnage, you don't really have much to lose. He ends up being empowered by Chithon's magic and loses his vulnerability to sound waves. But he gains a weakness to chthonic magic, against which Venom is much stronger.
Venom's origin story is the stuff of nightmares for Spider-Man as well as other wayward hosts. The emotional buffet that keeps Venom fit and energized is also a tricky way to score a free meal. Beyond this tenuous point, Venom harbors a lot of superpowers that he'd like to keep a lid on. Since Venom shares a lot of these in parasitic collaborations, is he putting himself in jeopardy? The secret's out. CBR is your premier source of geeky goodness. Merge with the red subscription button below to stay up to date on all of our wicked videos.
I know what it feels like.
Fear of surfboards and waves. Collectively, the Clintar, aka alien symbiotes, are to be avoided at all costs. They are a tremendous pain in the keister to shed should they latch onto you as a host. They're as deadly as they are fearless. Not that they're totally without fear though, and one of them is just ridiculous. We all know that fire is dangerous, but for alien symbiotes, flame will make the oily monster retreat like melted butter. One time, the Bro Monster and Spidey scuffled, and the web-slinger produced a cheap old lighter and burned some old copies of the Bugle. Bizarre that they're susceptible to a primitive element. Then again, the xenomorphs from Alien aren't the marshmallow roasting type either. What about sound? loud sound waves aren't tasty for Clintar. This isn't a secret, but it's another Achilles tendon that he wishes others had no knowledge of. In the Marvel Cinematic release Spider-Man 3, our hero defeated the hateful and possessed Eddie Brock by using scaffold piping and serenading him with a little industrial music. However, Galactus makes the Clintar collectively pee their pantsuits, and by default, so does the Silver Surfer. The Surfer explored a planet that the Clintar infested before Galactus ate it like a snack.
Problem is, Eddie Brock isn't the same guy he once was.
The VEGGIE option. We're all slaves to our body chemistry, and no one is spared from its influence. Not even the black space body glove. But for an entity that feasts on the adrenaline and the fears of their host, they also like to chow down on the brains of their victims. Which is a gross ramification of being a symbiote host. Eddie Brock, while hosting Venom, became sick and tired of eating them sweet sweetbreads. So he made a smart dietary choice. Chocolate. The secret ingredient to the meal replacement is phenylethylamine, a chemical that pumps up well-being as well as focus and energy. But phenethylamine is also abundant in brain tissue. Now, we're not opposed to villains having their skull caps being used like bowls, but again, it's a case of whether the host's okay with brain salad or not. If Venom wants to keep the fact that he's cuckoo for Cocoa a secret, it's up to him. If his six-pack becomes a gut, he's not going to be able to conceal it unless he starts wearing a muumuu. For those of you who love ad-free viewing and free things, we're excited to announce the Premium Network. The Premium gets you early access to videos from CBR, The Gamer, Screen Rant, and many other great channels. Thousands of videos in one place with ad-free browsing. How sweet is that? Sign up for free The Premium by clicking the link to start binge-watching videos from your favorite channels. Infinite entanglements. Oh indeed, what a tangled web Venom weaves. That's because he damn near has a bottomless source of spiderwebbing. Unlike Spider-Man, who has finite amounts of ammo because he either produces his own silk or relies on his wrist shooter invention, Venom isn't disadvantaged as he can ride roughshod all over Manhattan. The Amazing Spider-Man number 300, written by David Michelini and artist Todd McFarlane in 1998, was Venom's debut. They also built in one fatal flaw that would be Venom's downfall. The psychotic scuba suit could get overconfident with his endless shtick and plumb tuckered himself out. In the battle that ensued, Spidey took considerable damage. Spider-Man capitalized on this weakness and he beat the symbiote's shadow at his own game. It'd be wise for Venom not to broadcast this flaw too loudly to his enemies. Maybe a new strategy would be to infect a mindless enemy like, say, the Minions, and Venom can kick back and store up more silky juice for when it's really needed.
You may be our spawn, but that won't keep us from destroying you.
Making little Venoms. The Clintar can procreate. That's just the facts of life for sentient space garments. They tend to carry 5 seeds under their jumpsuits that can become new symbiotes, like Carnage and Toxin, Venom's child and grandchild, we guess. Not that this family of freaks are sticklers for tradition. They harbor so much hatred and distrust for each other, and coupled with the characteristics of their host, well, they might just try to kill each other. With family dynamics and a lack of tenderness that matched that of a school of sharks, we would imagine that they want to keep this on the DL. In 2003's Venom number 11, Daniel Way and Francisco Herrera concocted a confusing and convoluted series that introduced Venom's clone offspring. If you could wade through crazy plot points, we got somewhat of a payoff when Venom, a la Eddie Brock, arrived in edition number 11. In a big brawl with the Fantastic Four, Venom makes the crazy decision of thrusting his rather intimidating tongue straight down the Thing's throat. The Human Torch sears off Venom's tongue with part of it staying in Ben Grimm's gut, while a chunk fell onto the ground. A passing slacker who quit his minimum wage job takes it home to try and sell on eBay.
We have massive infection, multiple GPI and FSI virus.
Di-Fi connection. Wow, Venom's skill set is almost impossible to pin down. From changing his appearance, merging with people as well as inanimate objects, the ultimate bad boy has also managed to go where Tron has gone before. That frontier is the internet, and we guess that makes him the first to uphold net brutality. In 1995's Venom Carnage Unleashed number 4, creators Larry Hama and Andrew Wildman hacked into an intriguing idea during the time of the internet's infancy, but they bestowed him the power to upload himself onto the web. Why would Hama and Wildman do such a thing? Well, Carnage broke himself out of a mental institution because he became aware that a popular video game about him had a new multiplayer option. He wanted to play a few rounds and bond with all of his online buddies. Not. Carnage's idea of bonding doesn't include laughs and popcorn. He wants your body and mind. Venom and Carnage take the fight online, trying to ram fists down each other's throats. Get it? Anyway, Venom bested Carnage. Why keep this ability quiet? Viruses! We bet that he's full of spam, malware, and ransomware. Ants in their pants. We don't care how tough you are, or think that you are, there will always be someone bigger and better lurking around the corner. If we're talking about the alien symbiotes, then pause a second and fathom someone or something that can scare the coal out of Venom and company. It seems that they aren't immune to becoming the hunted. Back in 1996, the miniseries Venom the Hunted turned the tables on these fearless nightmares. A race of xenophage sharing similarities to aliens' xenomorph came to Earth as the xenophage craved their tasty brains. Why does everyone from outer space crave brains? Making things more difficult for Eddie Brock's desire to literally keep his head, he needs to be extra vigilant as the xenophage can shapeshift into any form, including an antique hutch complete with fine chinaware. If he's careless, Brock will be on the receiving end of the good cutlery. Fortunately, he outsmarts the hungry bug by tricking it to eat a grenade. This knowledge could jeopardize his commanding position of supremacy and turn him into a lunch special.
Eddie Brock has embraced.
Passive aggressive. Venom has a huge hang-up with Spider-Man. It seems that his entire world revolves around the web-slinging nice guy. Seriously, it's a ridiculous love-hate obsession of his, but he's gotta make do with what's on hand. The meter for Venom's augmented and complementary superpowers are based on the host, and when anger is the energy fueling his undying vendetta against the webhead, this condition can produce disappointing results. Performance issues, if you will. In the case of Eddie Brock, there's nothing to worry about as he has become a sworn enemy of Peter Parker for ruining his newspaper career. Meanwhile, the symbiote had a bone to break when Spider-Man abandoned him during their first date on the Battleworld run. Eddie and Venom's mutual hatred amps up their combined potency. But like yin and yang, there's balance in this relationship. When Venom embedded himself into Mac Gargan, the outcome was underwhelming. Gargan's loathing of Spider-Man was less than Brock's. No fire, no smoke, and no toothy joy for the beast hankering for a good slobber in time.
How come nobody's ever tried to be a superhero?
Arrested Development. The customer is always right. Or is it the squeaky wheel gets the grease? When the petroleum-coated Spider-Man debuted in Amazing Spider-Man number 252 back in 1984, it was too much for comic fans. First sight of the cover that was riffing on the Amazing Fantasy number 15 artwork set off a backlash of complaints to Marvel HQ. How could they venomize their friendly neighborhood Spider-Man? It's fair to say that Venom had gone over like a lead balloon, but of course that was the death of our esteemed subject. And later that month, the revamped Spidey appeared in Marvel Team-Up number 141 with Daredevil. That sealed Venom's fate, temporarily. The people spoke, and Marvel heeded their request and shelved the spacesuit for a 7-month stretch. In the interim, the writers at Marvel spun a new story thread, telling Venom's origins about how it's a living entity who hijacked the web-slinger, among others. And we know the backstory of the symbiote's grudge that has burned for over 20 years. This isn't a secret on Venom's behalf, but from someone even more powerful, the writers.
We're not brothers!
Forget me not. Venom's amazing powers and abilities have never failed to impress us. We love the bond that he forms with his hosts and the grab bag of heightened powers that result from their rather unholy unions. We've scraped the tip of the iceberg of Venom's abilities in our list. The oil puddle of honor can draw from the wide catalog of benefactors and their powers that he's, let's say, gotten to know. As per usual, there's a snag concerning Venom's most bone-shattering power, genetic memory. A database of info that Venom gleans from his hosts gets stored in the suit. Venom's cohabitated with a lot of superheroes and villains. He gets around. All he has to do is remember their genetic traits and run with it. However, it's a good thing for those waging war with the symbiote that the segment of his genetic memory has been partially erased. Spider-Man might not be able to survive to kiss Mary Jane again. Venom's able to cycle through the unique powers of Red Hulk, Green Hulk, Ghost Rider, Eddie Brock, Deadpool, Thor, and Wolverine. Man, forget about it. Parker would become an unceremonious bug stain on Venom's windshield if Venom could only remember.
Stop calling us that!
Those old emotions. The Clintar are a complicated race of black goo, and their adaptive prowess has been the key to their survival, but the moral direction of their kind took a left turn at some point. We mainly know the symbiotes as a ruthless, parasitic nightmare that maintains control with a commanding grip. Seriously, you don't want to get under Venom's thumb. However, the Clintar weren't always a universal pest, as their origin story states that they were hell-bent on being noble. That was eons ago, before they became hooked on all of that scrumptious Earth-human fear. The case-by-case possessions that Venom perpetrated on others yields, well, varying results, like a warped sense of wrong and right, depending on the host's resentment towards Spider-Man. In Venom number 7, Eddie Brock prioritizes his hate and shifts that to the symbiote that they spawned, Carnage, temporarily sparing Spidey from their vengeance. Although nothing is forever and your face will turn blue before a conclusive pattern emerges from Venom's deeds, Flash Thompson is a more chill host, and this rubbed off a little on Venom. The dynamics to their tug of war usually place Venom's interests on top. Symbiotes transformed from benevolent to opportunistic parasites, and since their race became corrupted by the dark side, Venom was banished for being too nice. It's hard to think of Venom without thinking of Carnage, and vice versa. The two are linked, quite literally thanks to the alien symbiote that gave both of them their villainous powers. You might think their similarities end there, but you'd be wrong.
You may be our spawn, but that won't keep us from destroying you.
Venom and Carnage have more in common than Spider-Man and symbiotes, and we're here to break it down for you. Before we get to hunting for Easter eggs, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Once you do, you'll never have to again.
Together again.
Both are Spider-Man villains. Every superhero must have a foe, and if you're a popular character, you have to have a few bad guys in rotation. How can you be a superhero if you have nothing to fight for or against? A foil is what makes them rise to the occasion, overcome their fears, and swing into the history books as great. A nemesis forces a superhero to have a focus and constantly be on the guard. An attack could strike at any time and any place. One must be ready, right?
Didn't know you could do that.
If you're Spider-Man, your spider sense must be going off all the time. But not for these two major foils in Peter's world. You know, because he can't sense them. Venom and Carnage are both major villains in the Spider-Man universe. They're both major foes in the comic books and will be in the cinematic universe as well, once the new franchise gets slinging. Both archenemies have battled Spider-Man for a very long time. Sometimes Peter Parker has a tough time going up against just one of them. Other times in the comic books, Spider-Man must go up against both at the same time. Venom and Carnage, though both vying to take down the web-slinger, are not actively working together to defeat Spider-Man. We don't think these two play well with others, do you? Boom. Encounters with Deadpool. Does it sometimes feel like everything in the Marvel Universe is connected through Wade Wilson? Instead of playing 6 Degrees of Separation with Kevin Bacon, play the Marvel version with Deadpool. It's almost like it can't be considered official until you've had some encounter with Wilson. Oh, hello. Venom and Carnage are both linked to the Merc with a Mouth, but in different ways in the comic books. Venom and Deadpool have a long history with one another. It turns out that Wade Wilson has bonded with the Venom symbiote on more than one occasion. In the first run of Secret Wars, over 20 years ago, Deadpool and Venom merged. The latest incarnation of the two characters imagined their merging in a series called Back in Black. In addition, there was a What If series that imagined a reality where Wilson permanently bonded with the Venom symbiote. Can you imagine how everything could have been different if Marvel had decided to keep it that way? Deadpool has also come in contact with Carnage for a period of time, in a complicated storyline that involves a lot of trickery. Let's just say, Deadpool and Carnage didn't walk away on good terms. Carnage vowed revenge against Deadpool, so we'll have to wait to see how he gets it.
Between the two of us, Dad, there won't be enough left of Spider-Man.
Created by symbiotes. While Spider-Man got his powers through the bite of a radioactive spider, his two most famous super foes got their powers in very different ways. Technically, Spider-Man helped form both Carnage and Venom when he first discovered the symbiotic suit on the alien planet. If not for his original suit being destroyed, triggering Parker's search for a new one, then neither Venom nor Carnage would have come into existence. Peter discovered the black and white Venom suit. When he put it on, he found that it gave him new special abilities. Parker developed regenerative powers and suddenly had unlimited webbing fluid. However, this was no suit. Well, not like the original red and blue suit anyway. The suit was an alien life form. When Spider-Man rid himself of the symbiote, it found journalist Eddie Brock. It attached itself to Brock and helped bring out some of his worst qualities, which the symbiote loves to do. Brock became incarcerated where he met Cletus. The symbiote Venom life form left behind a piece of itself in the jail cell when Brock left. That little piece then infected the bloodstream of Cletus Cassidy to become Carnage. Carnage's symbiote was different than Venom, turning him red instead of black. In addition, Cassidy's blood is infected with the organism, unlike Brock, who wears the suit.
Brock's rage and vengefulness made us a perfect breeding ground.
Both have human counterparts. Venom and Carnage Carnage are symbiotic supervillains who will stop at nothing to take down Spider-Man and rain chaos. Did you know that both characters have human counterparts with unique backstories? Venom's most famous host is Eddie Brock. Carnage comes from Cletus Kasady, one of the worst human beings in all the Spider-Man universe. Without a doubt, Carnage is a monster who has earned the name Carnage. Even before he was a supervillain chasing after Spider-Man, Kasady was a psychopath. Cletus Kasady is known for going on murderous rampages throughout the city. Even as a regular human, he's a handful for the authorities and should be avoided at all costs. He did awful things to his family members and eventually became orphaned. Venom's counterpart, Eddie Brock, is less of a danger to society than Carnage, but he's still one pretty bad dude. A journalist, Brock developed cancer. An issue with one of his articles led to him being fired from the Daily Globe.
There's not a paper in town that will hire me.
You should have thought of that earlier.
His wife Anne left him. He started working out relentlessly to try and ease his mind, but it didn't work. He became obsessed and blamed all of his troubles on Spider-Man. Once he became Venom, he took his obsession and rage to a new level.
And now, here's a brand new sound for you and your partner in slime.
They became superheroes. We're always talking about what a crazy killer Carnage is and what destruction Venom brings down on New York City. Those things are absolutely true and should not be forgotten. These are very bad characters, and we're thankful Peter Parker's there to stop them. However, not everything that is bad stays bad, or at least in the Marvel comic book universe. Sometimes a villain gets a small reprieve from being bad and gets to be good, even if they're only good for a short while. In the case of Venom and Carnage, both have had the opportunity to be good guys. Bet you didn't see that one coming. For Carnage, his turn to good was a result of a spell cast by Dr. Doom and the Scarlet Witch. The spell changed the moralities of characters and made Carnage want to do good. He returned to New York City and immediately started saving people as a part of his change. Could you imagine that big red guy coming at you only to find out he wants to help? Venom became a superhero in the Venom Space Knight series. He bonded with Flash Thompson. That amalgamation changed his personality and he started doing good deeds. He even went on adventures with the Guardians of the Galaxy to help save people.
The suit. You gotta take it off.
Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you?
Both are getting a movie. Supervillains have all sorts of origin stories. Sometimes the character's been wronged and needs to seek retribution, or the villain is jealous of the superhero and wants to take them down. No matter the cost, the villain will plan and plot to crush them. In the case of Venom and Carnage, neither of them are on the side of good. They are, however, inextricably linked to one another. If not for Venom, there would be no Carnage. It's hard to think of one without thinking of the other. When it comes to Venom and Carnage, their stories are so compelling and plotlines so interesting that they're going to be getting time on the big screen. Both are very popular with fans, and we're excited with the announcement. Tom Hardy has signed on to play Eddie Brock, the human host of Venom.
My name is Max.
The character of Cletus Kasady, who the Carnage symbiote attaches to, has yet to be cast. We can only imagine who they'll get to play Carnage. Who do you think it'll be? We also hope that Spider-Man will make an appearance too. The film is set to be released in 2018. We can't wait to see what happens between now and then.
Peter Parker. No, wait. How about that guy from Aerosmith?
Multiple hosts. When talking about Venom and Carnage, it can be easy to forget that there are humans attached to the alien lifeform. An alien lifeform triggered the creation of Venom. It has its own personality, abilities, and desires that are separate from the hosts it infects. It can be easy to forget that Venom and Carnage can merge with other hosts. While we've talked a lot about Eddie Brock in this video because he was the first host of Venom after Spider-Man, he wasn't the only host. Venom has merged with several individuals over the course of its lifetime, bringing out the innate qualities and abilities of each one. This makes each iteration of Venom unique. Two of the most well-known hosts besides Eddie in the comic books are McDonald Mac Gargan and Eugene Flash Thompson.
I know. Peter Parker and Flash all friendly?
Let's not forget, technically Peter Parker was a host too. For Carnage, hosts work a little different. Carnage infects the bloodstream, so it can stay with you forever. In the Marvel Universe, both the Silver Surfer and Ben Reilly have been Carnage. Perhaps the most famous host was Dr. Octopus. That'd be one scary sight, to have 8 legs and the powers of Carnage? We would totally wait for Spider-Man to deal with this one.
Sure, we'll see each other soon enough. Spider-Man.
Similar superpowers. As Uncle Ben Parker would say,
with great power comes great responsibility.
With great power also comes amazing abilities.
I'll figure it out.
Thanks to the alien lifeform that enhanced both of their lives, the Venom suit and Carnage have given their hosts superpowers. One of the most powerful abilities both of these characters have, which makes them difficult to fight for Spider-Man, is they're immune to the Spidey sense. Because the Venom symbiote joined with Peter Parker before being with Brock and spawning off to Carnage, Parker's alert doesn't trigger. That is a very valuable power that both use to their advantage whenever they can. Both have regenerative qualities. qualities. When Eddie Brock was Venom, he had been suffering from cancer before he bonded with the suit. The symbiote rolled back the effects of the terminal disease and healed Brock. The catch was, of course, once Brock was no longer Venom, the cancer would come back. Carnage has accelerated healing, which is more powerful than Venom's abilities. Carnage can regenerate broken bones and tissues as well as heal basic injuries. In addition, both share a variety of abilities that make them formidable opponents. They both possess increased stamina and strength. They also have access to web abilities like Spider-Man.
Together now!
Similar weaknesses. Spider-Man regularly fights powerful opponents like the Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, or the Hobgoblin. However, Venom and Carnage are different than his regular foes. These two came from an alien symbiote, not some technologically developed armor or special serum. In the hierarchy of power, Carnage is a more powerful entity than Venom. This also means that Venom and Carnage have similar weaknesses. Even though they're different and affect their hosts in different ways, they still come from the same originating source. The major vulnerability these two share is to sound. When Spider-Man was originally wearing the Venom suit and discovered it was an alien symbiote, he wanted to get it off. He had difficulty finding a way to extricate himself from Venom.
But not only does the suit bond, in time it replaces.
He eventually used the loud sound of church bells ringing to rid himself of the suit. Intense sounds and sonic waves are Spider-Man's best friend. It is the cast that with each new spawn, their resistance to sound increases. However, no symbiote has been found to be immune, and this weapon continues to be used against them. Another major weakness Venom and Carnage have is heat. One good blast with elevated temperatures can cause some serious damage. Does that mean Peter should only fight these guys near the equator?
Score! Cool! Slimy!
Fought other superheroes. Venom and Carnage have been in the Marvel comic book universe for a long time. While they will be making the cinematic universe debut next year, we're also wondering if they'll also be incorporated into more than just the Spider-Man universe. What do you think? In the comic books, Carnage and Venom are not strictly resigned to being Peter Parker's opponents. We would be remiss to mention that they're often depicted as battling one another. However, they have gone up against other superheroes in the universe as well. This makes for interesting dynamics and combinations. We're hoping the writers in the MCU think about this when bringing them to the big screen as well. Maybe an Infinity Wars cameo? As we said earlier in the video, Carnage has gone up against Dr. Doom and the Scarlet Witch. One of the biggest powers Carnage ever came across was Sentry, who actually ended up ripping Carnage in half. Venom has even come in contact with Ghost Rider. Fun fact, Venom is immune to the Rider's penance stare.
Look into my eyes.
Could you imagine what that staring contest would look like? It could go on forever. There's also an alternative storyline about Venom and the Punisher.
Stop! Spider-Man is ours, and ours alone.
Although Carnage is a combination of Spider-Man and Venom, he is his own unique entity. It can be easy to associate Peter Parker with Carnage, but that would be a serious mistake. Like most supervillains, his backstory is shrouded in darkness. Don't worry, we're here to pull apart the Carnage from Spider-Man and show you what he can do all on his own. Hey, the subscribe button won't click itself. We'll wait a few seconds while you move the mouse over to the red button and click subscribe. You'll get daily videos delivered to your inbox in exchange.
Carnage is Did we do that?
Healing the most savage wounds. The Marvel Universe has a few well-known superheroes with healing abilities, such as Wolverine, Deadpool, and the Incredible Hulk. Did you know that Carnage also has advanced regenerative abilities? Spider-Man, for all his capabilities, wishes he could heal the way Carnage does during a fight. Unfortunately, the web slinger comes nowhere close to Carnage. Carnage's ability works on several levels. While engaging opponents in a fight, Carnage can heal on the go. Venom might get a few jabs in, but the wounds will heal and the bones will set. Once, Venom managed to tear Carnage's head off from his body, which, if that ever happened to Peter Parker, it would end everything. Carnage got the head back and simply reattached it to his body and kept on going. It was also revealed in the comic books that the host, Cletus Cassidy, had been suffering from stomach cancer previous to being infected by the alien. Once the symbiote got into his bloodstream, it immediately healed the cancer. After Carnage detached from Cassidy, it was revealed that the alien was the only thing keeping him alive and the cancer at bay. Essentially, he's immune to all earthly diseases. Peter Parker is not immune, despite being an enhanced human. This gives Carnage a distinct advantage. 24 hours of straight fighting. Could you imagine being locked in a physical fight for an entire day? We aren't talking a 9 to 5 here either. We're talking about a full 24 hours. We don't know about you, but we couldn't imagine being able to anything for a straight 24 hours. Okay, well, maybe sleeping, but that's still a lot. Carnage is one of the rare entities in the Marvel Universe whose stamina can carry him through a full day and night of fighting without fatigue setting in. This is on level with Thor and the Incredible Hulk. Spider-Man, though he can engage in increased physical activity for longer periods of time than the average human, cannot reach this level. That means if we were to go by a standard of pure energy, Carnage outranks our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man every time. This is a major disadvantage for the web-slinger. If he doesn't somehow start to beat Carnage in the first few hours of fighting, Peter Parker is not going to win the fight. Carnage can rely on his alien DNA to carry him through a lengthy battle. Carnage has the added advantage that his abilities do not weaken over time as well. That means he can use all his powers at peak physical condition for a full day before even the slightest fatigue sets in.
Ultimate destruction!
Can infect others. One of the fundamental differences between Carnage and Spider-Man is the source of their powers and how it manifests with the user. As we all know, Peter Parker was bit by a radioactive spider that endowed him with enhanced abilities. Many of the powers resemble the abilities of the arachnid. Carnage is an alien symbiote who infects a host through the bloodstream. These are two very different paths to powers, which means that Carnage can do something significant that Peter Parker cannot do. While Peter's powers are always with him, he can't actually give them to another entity. Carnage is the manifestation of the symbiote inside of a host, so it's like there are two entities when it comes to the alien. Carnage can and does willfully infect humans and extraterrestrial entities with its symbiote. Peter cannot do this. That means Carnage can hop from host to host whenever it feels like it. The host is left behind as a normal human once the entity leaves its bloodstream. For example, Carnage tried to attach itself to the Silver Surfer. Spider-Man could never do that. He'd have to run out, grab a radioactive spider, and swing back to the Surfer and try to get the spider to bite him. Carnage has the upper hand when it comes to this difference in abilities.
In your face, ugly!
Immune to Spider-Man's weaknesses. One of the best things about Carnage is that he's immune to most of Spider-Man's weaknesses. That means he can regularly employ the techniques in order to defeat Spider-Man. In this regard, Carnage is more powerful than Peter Parker. Carnage only has 2 known weaknesses that can be used against him during a fight. Carnage is weak to loud sounds. It's not as bad as Venom's weakness to sound, but it's still present. Because Carnage is a progeny of Venom, he has a lesser version of it. The biggest weakness of Carnage is extreme heat, which Carnage doesn't have to worry about using against Spider-Man because Peter has more weaknesses to choose from to exploit. That means Carnage can easily survive more attacks than his counterpart. This may be due to his accelerated healing. For example, Spider-Man is vulnerable to gas attacks, like the one he experienced in the Amazing Spider-Man issue number 39. He can be taken out by ethyl chloride. The chemical compound, when used in the correct dosage, can relieve Spider-Man of his abilities. Then he's in a lot of trouble. Carnage can easily survive all of these scenarios. When you think about it, Spider-Man sure is vulnerable.
More chaos!
No moral code. Sometimes the difference between a superhero and their nemesis is not a tangible variance. It isn't a quantifiable power that can be measured against each other to see who's more powerful or who can shoot the longest web. This difference between Carnage and Spider-Man is subtler. It can be found on the inside, not the outside. Peter Parker has always prided himself on knowing right from wrong. He makes the hard choices when faced with a tricky situation. He values integrity and helping people. Peter will go out of his way to help and save lives, even at the cost of his own personal well-being. He would never maliciously take a life, even if it was that of an opponent. Carnage has none of those traits. Carnage can do what Peter Parker cannot do. Carnage can take the life of others without worrying about it or weigh the consequences. He simply acts. Granted, Carnage does not make a distinction between the good and the bad, he just attacks. Sometimes, like when Carnage first encountered Spider-Man, he attacks at random. There are times when perhaps Spider-Man should have attacked or taken someone out and he chose not to. Carnage would not hesitate. He lacks a moral code and can act without remorse or guilt.
Think of the damage we can do now, man!
Carnage isn't a suit you put on. Carnage is a character in the Marvel Universe that can often be misunderstood due to the dual nature of the entity. A normal villain or superhero is in two parts, the superhero and their alter ego. The alter ego walks around during the day, gets invited to parties, and had to go to the grocery store to buy paper towels. Peter Parker is Spider-Man's all-American alter ego. He doesn't necessarily need the alias like when superheroes decided to reveal themselves during the Civil War plotline. But an alter ego can be useful. Spider-Man comes to life when Peter puts on the costume. Carnage is not a suit. Carnage is also not a secret identity. Carnage is an alien symbiote that was created by Venom. Carnage attaches itself to a host. The most infamous host for the symbiote has been Cletus Cassidy. However, Carnage can infect multiple individuals at once or attach itself to a new host at will. That means, unlike Peter Parker, Carnage is actually two entities and not one. Peter Parker will always be Spider-Man, but needs the suit to truly take on the role. Carnage is an entirely unique entity and even has its own personality. Peter Parker and Spider-Man are not unique to one another and never can be.
Didn't know you could do that!
Form constructs out of his body. Every superhero is endowed with a set of powers that are unique. Sometimes there are overlaps in similar abilities, but the overall power sets are special. For example, Spider-Man, Venom, and Carnage all share the ability to crawl or move across surfaces in any direction, even over slick surfaces, thanks to their spider-like clinging. From that shared pool, Carnage may have a special variation on the same power. The alien symbiote endowed Carnage with an ability that Spider-Man wishes he could access. Webbing is great. You can use it to swing, as a shield, a defensive tool, and 1,000 other things. Carnage can do one better. He has shape-shifting abilities. Yeah, you didn't hear us wrong. It seems almost unfair for such a powerful creature to also make constructs out of his skin by rearranging its molecules. Out of his hands, Carnage can form weapons that are extensions of his limbs. He can make a sword, tendrils, spears, or darts. Imagine being Spider-Man and shooting a web at Carnage, and he responds by willing himself to form an axe where his left hand is. The plus side seems to be that when Carnage makes a throwable object like a dart, once it leaves his body, it disintegrates within 10 to 30 seconds.
That was useless. Maybe my expectations were too high.
Enhanced powers. In the last entry of this video, we briefly talked about shared skill sets when it comes to enhanced superpowers and extraterrestrial beings. When it comes to the Spider-Man, Venom, and Carnage triangle, this is more true than other character groups. This is because these three characters are kind of related to one another. When the symbiote Venom disembarked from Spider-Man, it retained certain qualities and abilities. After all, Peter Parker was Venom's first host. Carnage broke off from Venom and is a direct descendant from both entities, retained abilities from both. Does this mean Peter Parker is Carnage's grandfather? We don't know the answer to that question, but it sure feels like it. What do you think? As a result of having these two genetic influences and being an alien symbiote, Carnage's overall abilities are far more enhanced than Peter Parker. Taking the example of Spidey and Carnage being able to crawl across a variety of surfaces due to their webbing and grip, Carnage's ability is greater compared to Spider-Man. He can move at a faster rate along surfaces. Spider-Man would never be able to match the same speed as his counterpart. This is true of Carnage's strength, durability, and ground speed as well. Regular Spider-Man cannot match Carnage in these categories.
Carnage! I like it!
Block out tracking senses. Carnage can avoid detection. While he can't literally turn invisible, he's able to mask his presence from Venom and Spider-Man thanks to their shared lineage regarding the alien symbiote. Peter Parker, on the other hand, cannot go as undetected. Due to Venom and Carnage being descendants from Spider-Man, in the way only a comic book character can be, they always have a little part of Peter with them. It's like the symbiote never forgets the makeup of its hosts. Thanks to this muscle memory, Carnage is undetectable to the Spidey sense. Unfortunately for Spider-Man, that is a one-way street. He cannot hide from Carnage's tracking abilities. Fun fact, in addition to being able to ditch Spider-Man, Carnage can do the same with Venom. That means Spider-Man has to hunt down Carnage the old-fashioned way, or he follows the chaos and destruction left behind in the symbiote's wake and it leads Peter right to him. In fact, that's how Spider-Man first found Carnage in Amazing Spider-Man issue number 430. Carnage likes to leave a trail for others to find him in a cat-and-mouse game kind of way. Spider-Man had to follow the clues left behind, like the phrase "Carnage rules" smeared at a scene to track down the crazy alien entity.
I think there's more going on here than it seems.
Camouflage. As we've discussed, Carnage isn't a suit Cletus Cassidy puts on in the morning under his business attire and walks around all day wearing. He isn't waiting for the right moment to duck into a bathroom stall to tear off the suit and tie to terrorize the neighborhood. The symbiote is in the host's bloodstream, bonding with DNA. Carnage comes out from within and is with Cletus all the time. As a result, Cassidy has control over being able to produce Carnage at will, something Spider-Man cannot do. This means Cassidy has full control over the shape, size, color, and texture of the symbiote. Control over his own biomass means that he can rearrange his cells to form the Carnage suit from his own skin. Even better, he can make any type of garment he wants by controlling these elements. Whereas Spider-Man has to make specific suits for an occasion or have Tony Stark make him a new model. A special subset of this ability is camouflage. Carnage has been known to use this ability in battle. Spider-Man, the Peter Parker version, cannot camouflage, as much as he may want to sometimes. However, we know that Miles Morales can. It seems like it would be pretty hard to blend into the side of a building with a red and blue suit on. Don't you agree?
Good luck, Spider-Man. Excelsior!
Who knew Carnage is capable of so much? Well, we do now. If you were Spider-Man, what Carnage ability would worry you the most? Let us know in the comments below. While you're here, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and check out more awesome videos from our playlist. And if you liked our video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and share with your friends. As always, thanks for watching.